Hey guys, tonight we slip into the warm sands of the Nile Valley, where the sun has been pounding the desert so long it almost hums in your ears. The river glimmers like a living ribbon, and the air smells faintly of mud, straw, and something a little yeasty, because, believe it or not, the ancient Egyptians were masters of brewing. And not just brewing to quench thirst, but brewing to, well, bend reality a little. You're about to find yourself following farmers and priests who knew how to push grain and herbs far beyond their humble roles as food. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive their happy hour specials, but you'll get the full tour tonight, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you've got the time, post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a dusty road where donkeys kick up clouds and baskets of grain are hauled toward a brewery hut. Inside, the floor is sticky, the air thick with steam, and vats bubble with mixtures of barley bread, water, and date syrup. This is beer, but not the crisp lager you imagine today. No, this stuff is heavy, more like liquid porridge, a slurry of carbs, foam, and yeast. Workers ladle it out, and for the Egyptians, it isn't just lunch, it's life. Beer fueled the pyramids, it paid wages, and it softened the monotony of hauling limestone in the blazing sun. But here's where things get interesting. Scholars note that in certain tombs and temple records, the beer wasn't just plain. Herbs were tossed in, like mandrake or even henbane, plants with properties that could make you see the gods if you weren't careful. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or just accidental fermentation gone wild. Was a worker who staggered home after too many mugs just drunk, or did he accidentally sip a proto-psychedelic smoothie? Imagine you're handed a clay cup. It's warm in your hands, gritty with unfiltered bits, and you take a gulp. Sweet, sour, and thick, it coats your mouth. After a few more, your vision swims, not from dehydration, but from yeast fermenting sugars into more alcohol than your modern stomach can comfortably handle. Egyptians didn't pasteurize or control their batches, so some brews may have been tame, while others were dangerously strong. Mainstream fact, beer was truly the backbone of Egyptian society, given in daily rations to workers, offered to gods, and even left in tombs for the afterlife. But the quirky tidbit? Some scholars suspect Egyptians deliberately let batches spoil into high-potency alesh, especially for festival days, when people wanted more than just hydration. Think of it like your roommate in college leaving cider in the closet for 6 months, accidental, but effective, and there's a wider debate. Were Egyptians knowingly experimenting with altered states, or were they simply bumping into them by mistake? Thanks to the unpredictable chemistry of fermentation in a desert climate. Some argue that priests definitely controlled recipes for stronger stuff, using them in rituals. Others think ordinary folk stumbled into intoxication without needing priests' help. The truth, as always, probably lies in a muddled clay jar somewhere in between. You wander deeper into the village and notice another trick. Egyptians flavored beer with dates, honey, or herbs, not just for taste, but possibly to enhance effects. A brew spiked with blue lotus petals, for example, could deliver a mellow, dreamy sensation beyond the buzz. So when the harvest festival came around, and people lined up to drink until their stomachs sloshed, the line between celebration and chemical experiment blurred. Imagine the sounds: drums thumping, women laughing, men singing off-key, all echoing against mud brick walls. The beer sloshes, the herbs kick in, and suddenly a simple village feast feels like a cosmic party. Was that Osiris stepping out of the shadows? Or just your neighbor's goat? Hard to tell once the night rolled on. Of course, not everyone approved. Records suggest there were scribes and moralists shaking their heads at excess drinkers, warning that too much beer turned men into fools. Yet even they admitted it had a sacred role. Beer was poured out for gods, given as offerings, and written about in hymns as a gift of Hathor, the goddess of love and intoxication. picture it, you're at the edge of the Nile, the reeds whispering, your head fuzzy, and the horizon starts to shimmer. The water seems to ripple with faces, the stars flicker brighter, and you can almost hear the gods chuckling. This is what beer could do in the ancient world, not just quench, but transport. And if you think this was limited to peasants, remember, even pharaohs had their breweries. Archaeologists have uncovered huge complexes capable of producing thousands of liters, which means whole processions of priests and servants marched under the influence of beer, their steps unsteady, their chants a little slurred. Religious ecstasy or tipsy karaoke night, it all depended on the batch. The smell of malt lingers in your nose as you leave the brewery behind. The Nile air cools your flushed cheeks. Somewhere nearby, a priest prepares to steep lotus petals in wine, while a farmer fumbles with a smoking herb. You don't know it yet, but this is just the beginning of Egypt's long, strange dance with altered states. You slip past the brewery haze, your head still buzzing faintly, and stumble into a quieter courtyard. Here the air is sweet, almost floral, and the smell isn't malt or barley this time, it's something lighter, something drifting from shallow basins where blossoms float in the water. This is the blue lotus, that elegant flower painted on tomb walls, carved into temples, and tucked between the hands of reclining nobles on faded murals. Its petals open in the sunlight and close at night, as if the plant itself is breathing with the rhythm of the Nile. When you bend down to sniff it, the fragrance is gentle, sweet, a little like anise, with an earthy undertone. And here's the thing, the Egyptians didn't just admire the blue lotus for its beauty. They soaked it in wine. They brewed it in teas. They crushed it into perfumes. The flower appears again and again in artwork, held up to noses in delicate gestures that look suspiciously like someone enjoying more than just the scent. Mainstream fact, archaeologists have found depictions of blue lotus in almost every major ceremonial context, banquets, funerary rites, and temple festivals. It was sacred to the sun god Ra, associated with rebirth, and symbolized the idea of life springing from the dark waters of chaos. But quirky tidbit: modern chemical tests suggest the plant contains alkaloids that may have mild psychoactive effects, producing relaxation, euphoria, even dreamlike states if steeped in alcohol. So when you picture priests sipping lotus wine at dusk, you might be picturing the earliest cocktail hour. You recline on a reed mat and someone presses a cup into your hand, clay again, rough on your lips. The liquid inside is reddish wine, tart with pomegranate, and floating in it are a few crushed lotus petals. You drink, the bitterness mixing with sweetness, and within a while, the edges of the world feel softer. The chatter of musicians grows distant, as though you've stepped slightly sideways into another layer of sound. Historians still argue whether the blue lotus was genuinely hallucinogenic, or whether its power lay mostly in cultural symbolism. Some argue the effects were subtle, closer to an herbal relaxant. Others claim ritual use concentrated those effects into deeper trances. Especially combined with fasting, drumming, and the heady atmosphere of a crowded temple at midnight, imagine yourself at a noble's banquet. Oil lamps flicker. Platters of roasted goose and figs are passed around. Musicians pluck harps while women sway in flowing linen dresses. Servants refill cups with wine steeped in lotus petals, and the laughter grows louder, the dancing wilder. On the walls, paintings show the same flowers you're sipping now, drawn in such abundance it almost looks like the entire party is blooming. This isn't just decoration, it's a coded message. Here, in this intoxication, lies joy, life, maybe even divine communion. And here's the joke: the Egyptians weren't subtle about it. Tomb art often shows party guests literally sniffing lotus flowers as they drink, a sort of ancient Instagram humblebrag about their good vibes. Picture someone saying, "No worries, I'm just vibing with RA tonight," while tipping back their lotus cocktail. But not everyone was here for the revelry. Priests guarded the flower's sacred side carefully. In temple rituals, lotus was placed on altars, burned as offerings, and worn in garlands that were believed to help the soul awaken in the afterlife. If beer was the fuel of the masses, lotus was the subtle incense of the elite, more refined, more mysterious, a ticket to experiences that peasants hauling stones might never taste. There's another layer too. The lotus closes at night, sinks beneath the water, and re-emerges in the morning sun. For Egyptians, this wasn't just botany, it was cosmic theater, mirroring the cycle of death and rebirth. Drinking lotus wine, then, wasn't just about relaxation. It was about aligning yourself with the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. Was the gentle buzz just a side effect? Or the very mechanism through which they felt closer to the gods? You lean back, the stars sharp above the desert sky. The sounds of banter fade, replaced by the hum of insects. The flower crown on your head feels heavier than it should, and your body loosens into the mat. Suddenly, one of the painted figures on the nearby wall seems to shift, its lotus tilts toward you, its eyes glowing faintly. Is that just the lamp's shadow? Or are you slipping into the kind of vision Egyptians hoped for when they bathed their senses in blossoms? The debate continues. Some argue lotus was nothing more than an aromatic garnish, like mint in a mojito. Others suspect it was Egypt's subtle doorway to the divine, a naturally occurring key to altered states. The truth, again, probably floats somewhere in between, like a lotus blossom itself, bobbing in wine, half in the world of feasts, half in the world of gods. And as the music resumes, and your cup is filled again, you realize that the Egyptians didn't separate the two worlds. For them, the divine was right here in the courtyard, in laughter and dancing, in the shared intoxication of petals and wine. Life, death, rebirth, all unfolding in the rhythm of one more sip. The wine and lotus haze lingers as you drift away from the banquet. The laughter and music fade, replaced by the soft trickle of Nile water against reed beds. The air smells faintly smoky now, resinous, earthy, and just a little sharp, the way campfires do when someone tosses in green branches. You squint and see, tucked among palms, a small gathering of men crouched around a clay bowl. One of them leans over it, inhales deeply, and then exhales a slow, satisfied plume. Hashish, at least, that's what some scholars suspect might have been smoldering here. Egypt had trade routes stretching out like veins across the desert, east toward the Levant, south into Nubia, and west toward oases where exotic resins and herbs could be found. Cannabis pollen has actually been detected in some Egyptian remains, though whether it was deliberately smoked, eaten, or just carried in the wind from imported plants is still up for debate. Mainstream fact: Egyptians used an astonishing array of plant-based medicines. Papyri mention hemp seeds as remedies for inflammation and pain relief. They also used oils extracted from all kinds of herbs, rubbed into sore joints or applied to wounds. Quirky tidbit: some translations suggest that cannabis may have been used in gynecological treatments, as suppositories or topical ointments. So when you imagine priests or midwives with baskets of hemp, the vibe might not have been Woodstock. It might have been more like a wellness spa. Still, imagine the scene: a group of workers or priests slipping away with a clay pipe or bowl, heating crushed resin, letting the smoke curl upward into the cool desert air. You crouch beside them, your eyes stinging as the first curl hits your face. The taste is bitter, pungent, the kind that clings to your tongue. A few deep breaths and the Nile breeze feels softer, the rustling reeds louder, like whispers spreading across the river. Historians still argue whether Egyptians ever smoked hashish recreationally, or whether all evidence points only to medicinal use. Some believe it was restricted to ritual settings, guarded carefully by temple healers. Others think the absence of detailed records might mean it was so common that nobody bothered writing it down. After all, why describe what everyone already knew? Picture yourself walking back toward the city. The torches seem brighter, halos glowing larger than they should. A donkey brays in the distance, but the sound comes to you stretched and wobbly, like a flute being played underwater. You stumble a little, giggling, yes, even you, because somehow the donkey's voice sounds like it's complaining about work conditions. And maybe it is. Meanwhile, Medical texts like the Eber's papyrus list recipes where herbs were ground with honey, mixed into oils, or formed into pastes. Some of these concoctions likely carried psychoactive effects, whether intended or not. An aching back might be soothed, yes, but so too might the patient suddenly find themselves staring dreamily at ceiling rafters, wondering if the goddess Hathor just winked. There's a deeper tension here. Cannabis was not native to the Nile Valley, it had to arrive through contact with other cultures. So every puff or spoonful was also a reminder of Egypt's place in a vast trading web. Did merchants from the Levant carry resin bricks wrapped in cloth? Did Nubian envoys gift bundles of unfamiliar herbs to Pharaoh's court? The Egyptians left clues. But never the full story. And maybe that's fitting, after all, some smoke is meant to obscure as much as it reveals. A priest might tell you it wasn't about getting high but about opening the senses to the gods. And maybe, as you watch the moon shimmering on the Nile, you believe him. Your body feels light, your thoughts wandering, and suddenly the crocodile basking on the bank seems less like a threat and more like a cosmic roommate, guardian of some secret you'll never fully understand. Was this a planned ritual, carefully measured, or just people finding joy in altered perception after a long day of labor? The answer slips away like smoke in the breeze. You reach out, try to grasp it, but your fingers close on nothing. Just as the Egyptians may have intended. You wake, or maybe you never slept, in the thick of another feast. The courtyard buzzes again, but this time the cups being handed around are heavier, wider, and painted with grapevines. Wine, yes, but not the crisp, bottled Merlot you'd imagine at a modern dinner table. Egyptian wine was unpredictable, often thick, spiced, or even sour depending on how long it had been fermenting under the relentless desert sun. And when something spoiled, well, it didn't go to waste. It just got stronger. Mainstream fact: wine in Egypt was largely reserved for the elite. The common worker got beer rations, while nobles, priests, and pharaohs enjoyed amphorae of imported wine from Canaan or local vineyards tucked into the Nile Delta. Quirky tidbit: chemical residues found in ancient jars reveal wines were often mixed with pine resin, figs, herbs, and sometimes honey to boost flavor, and possibly their punch. Imagine drinking something halfway between sangria and cough syrup, with the kick of a mystery herbal cocktail. You take a sip. The taste is sweet at first, then resinous, leaving a sticky coat on your tongue. The afterburn is surprising, almost like sipping spiced rum. You blink, and the lamps hanging around the banquet glow larger, their flames trailing little golden comets when you turn your head. This isn't just alcohol, it's chemistry experimenting on your brain. Historians still argue whether Egyptians deliberately encouraged wines to over-ferment, creating high alcohol levels, or whether their unpredictable brewing conditions just made accidents happen frequently. Some amphorae even show signs of fortified mixtures, suggesting priests or brewers knew exactly what they were doing. Others insist spoilage was common and the psychoactive side effects were more of a happy accident than intentional design. You glance around at the nobles lounging on low couches. Musicians pluck lutes. Dancers whirl in linen skirts. And as the cups keep being refilled, the laughter grows louder, the movements looser. This isn't polite sipping, it's indulgence. Festivals dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love and intoxication, encouraged worshippers to drink until they stumbled. Imagine a holy day where everyone was expected to get drunk for the goddess. That's Egypt's version of mandatory fun. Then there are the spiced wines, which feel almost alchemical. A priest might toss in frankincense or myrrh, resins normally reserved for offerings to gods. Not only did these add bitter, aromatic notes, but burning resins in enclosed spaces could release psychoactive compounds too. So between the spiced cups and the incense wafting from altars, your senses would be swimming long before you realized it. Picture this: a procession through temple corridors. Torches flicker. Wine sloshes in clay pitchers. Priests chant hymns as the air thickens with frankincense smoke. The line between intoxication, devotion, and hallucination dissolves until worshippers sway in time, convinced that God Hathor herself is dancing alongside them. Of course, there's another side. Elite tombs show warnings: do not drink to excess. Scribes scold young men in papyri, warning that too much wine makes them stumble, speak foolishly, and shame their families. But if everyone was being scolded about it, that means, well, they were drinking plenty. And here's a playful thought: imagine stumbling home across uneven mud brick streets, wine sloshing in your stomach, when suddenly you see a crocodile in the canal. Is it real? Or is it just the shadows and the haze of herbs you swallowed with your wine? Egyptians knew that line well, the terrifying space between reality and vision, and they leaned into it, treating it as a meeting place with the divine. So, was Egyptian wine just a luxury drink, or was it a tool for bending perception, pulling people into shared altered states? The amphorae and papyri don't tell us everything. They just whisper hints. And as your head grows heavier, your body warmer, and your thoughts fuzzier, you realize the Egyptians may have liked it that way. The jar tips, another cup is poured, and as the liquid shimmers in the lamplight, you hear a noblewoman laugh loudly, declaring, "The gods are already here." You're not sure if she's joking. You're not sure if you're joking either. And maybe that's the point. The banquet fades into smoke, and soon you're walking down a narrow temple corridor where shadows stretch long against sandstone walls. The air here is thicker, perfumed with scents so layered you can't quite separate them: sweet resin, spicy herbs, and something sharp that prickles the back of your throat. This isn't food or drink now. It's incense, the Egyptians' way of filling sacred spaces with invisible clouds that lifted prayers upward. And perhaps lifted minds sideways. Mainstream fact: temple incense was everywhere in Egyptian ritual life. Priests burned kifi, a famous mixture of over a dozen ingredients: frankincense, myrrh, juniper berries, honey, wine, raisins, even poppy. Recipes are inscribed on temple walls and detailed in papyri, carefully recorded so future generations could recreate the sacred smoke. Quirky tidbit: some of these ingredients, when heated, release compounds that act on the nervous system. Frankincense, for example, contains insensilyl acetate, which modern studies suggest can reduce anxiety and create mild psychoactive effects. So those chanting priests weren't just enveloping themselves in fragrance. They might have been chemically priming their minds for visions. You close your eyes as the smoke curls around you. It clings to your skin, seeps into your hair, and your lungs feel heavier but also strangely lighter. The steady drone of chanting becomes hypnotic, each syllable vibrating against the temple stone. For a moment, you could swear the hieroglyphs on the walls shimmer, their falcons and jackals twitching just slightly as though they've been waiting to wake up. Historians still argue whether the recipes were meant as medicinal aromatherapy, as symbolic offerings, or as deliberate pathways into altered states. Some claim priests inhaled incense as a kind of sacred anesthesia during long nights of ritual, helping them endure hours of chanting. Others argue the symbolism mattered more than the effect. The smoke was the god's food, not the priest's drug. Yet standing here, with your head swimming in resinous fog, you suspect the line was blurry by design. Kifi wasn't just for temples. It was also sold as a luxury at markets, burned in homes to freshen the air, and even recommended as a treatment for insomnia. Imagine crawling into bed with smoke curling gently from a little burner, the smell of honey, wine, and herbs drifting over you. Ancient melatonin, with a side of trippy dreams. Priests kept their incense recipes guarded, and for good reason. The act of blending was itself ritual, grinding, mixing, chanting spells as each ingredient was added. You picture a white-robed priest, mortar in hand, grinding resins as a scribe recites hymns to Thoth. The process wasn't just chemistry. It was magic. And when that mix hit the fire, the entire temple would shift into another atmosphere entirely. Picture the festival of Osiris. 100 braziers blaze. The night sky glows orange. Smoke drifts upward, carrying prayers, but also wrapping thousands of worshippers in a chemical embrace. As the drums pound, the crowd sways, eyes half closed, bodies moving as one. Is this devotion, intoxication, or both? The Egyptians didn't bother separating them, and here's the sly thought: maybe you've been here before, just in another form. Think of stepping into a modern nightclub with fog machines, bass reverberating, and scents flooding your senses. The temple might not look the same, but the recipe for trance hasn't changed much in 3,000 years. Of course, there were skeptics even then. Some medical texts warn against too much incense, claiming it could make the head dizzy or the lungs weak. But even those warnings admit its power. Too much could overwhelm the body, and maybe that was part of the point. Push too far, and you stepped closer to the gods. The smoke thins for a moment, and moonlight slices across the temple floor. You breathe deeply, your chest heavy, your thoughts sluggish. Then the chant rises again, the braziers flare, and the world tilts slightly. Somewhere in the drifting haze, you think you see the falcon-headed Horus blink, and just like that, you understand why incense wasn't just fragrance in ancient Egypt. It was the air of the gods themselves, and breathing it meant brushing against the divine, one lungful at a time. The smoke clears, and suddenly you're not in the temple anymore. You're standing under the burning sun at Giza, where a line of men stretches along a causeway, their backs slick with sweat as they haul massive blocks of limestone. The air is filled with the rhythmic grunt of labor, the slap of sandals on stone, and the faint smell of something yeasty and sour. Because here, the workers aren't just being fed bread, they're being fueled by beer. Buckets of it. Gallons every day. Mainstream fact: Egyptian workers were paid in daily rations of bread and beer. Archaeologists at pyramid workers' villages found massive brewery complexes, capable of producing thousands of liters at once. A laborer might receive 3 to 4 jugs per day. Thick, porridge-like beer that filled the stomach and quenched thirst when water wasn't always safe. Quirky tidbit: those rations may have delivered more than hydration. Depending on fermentation, some batches carried surprisingly high alcohol levels, leaving workers not just nourished but more than a little tipsy. Imagine slogging through 12 hours of hauling blocks in 100-degree heat. Then, at sunset, someone hands you a clay mug of warm, foamy beer. You gulp it down. It's tangy, grainy, slightly sweet with date syrup. After the second or third mug, your aches blur, your mood lifts, and suddenly hauling rocks with your buddies feels more like a rowdy team sport. You joke, you sing. You might even forget your blisters. The line between painkiller and party favor is thin, and the Egyptians walked it daily. Historians still argue whether these rations were deliberately intoxicating, or whether the high alcohol content was just an occasional byproduct of brewing methods. Some suggest overseers preferred their workers slightly buzzed, less likely to complain, more willing to sing in rhythm as they pulled ropes together. Others argue it was mostly calories, the alcohol just an unavoidable extra. Still, when you picture thousands of half-drunk workers chanting in unison, it feels less like construction and more like a festival with rocks. You glance at one worker staggering slightly as he heaves a block. Another breaks into a drunken song, out of tune but cheerful. A scribe nearby scribbles notes on a shard of pottery, probably grumbling about lost productivity. But the work continues, the pyramid rises, and the beer flows. The scale is staggering. Excavations show vats large enough to brew beer for entire crews at once, some so vast that steam must have billowed out constantly, filling the workers' village with a yeasty fog. Imagine living in a town that permanently smelled like a brewery, where even children's porridge tasted faintly fermented. And here's where things get interesting. Some brews were flavored with herbs like coriander or mandrake. If those slipped into the workers' rations, whether by accident or design, then laborers might have found themselves not just relaxed, but downright euphoric. Was the Great Pyramid partly built by men buzzing on mild psychedelics? It's an unsettling thought, but one historians can't completely dismiss. Picture the scene at dusk, workers gathered around campfires, mugs in hand, laughing until tears stream down their faces. Someone tries to juggle stones and drops one on his foot, everyone roars. The stars blaze above the desert. And though they are exhausted, half-drunk, and covered in dust, they feel, for a fleeting moment, like kings themselves. Of course, not all consequences were fun. Too much beer, too often, could lead to sluggishness, nausea, or worse. Ancient moral texts warn about the drunkard who stumbles, speaks nonsense, and embarrasses himself. But even those warnings acknowledge the reality: beer was inseparable from daily life. To be Egyptian was to drink it, morning to night, whether you were a farmer, a mason, or a pharaoh. And the strangest part? Beer wasn't just earthly fuel. It was spiritual currency. Workers drank it, priests offered it to gods, tombs were stocked with it for the afterlife. Somewhere deep down, the Egyptians believed that intoxication wasn't just a side effect of survival, it was a bridge, carrying body and soul a little closer to the divine. So as the workers' songs drift across the sand, slurred but joyful, you realize, every block of the pyramid isn't just limestone. It's barley and yeast, sweat and laughter, drunken chants echoing against desert cliffs. And maybe, just maybe, that's why those monuments still hum faintly in the silence. They're built on a foundation of altered states. The night shifts. Suddenly you're not at Giza anymore, you're in the shadow of an Assyrian ziggurat, somewhere in Mesopotamia, where the river's edge glitters with torchlight. Here, intoxication isn't just a worker's ration. It's ceremony. It's statecraft. It's the machinery of power itself. In the courtyards of great temples, priests prepare vats of beer for ritual. The liquid is thick, almost soupy, laced with honey, herbs, and sometimes hallucinogenic additives whose recipes are now mostly lost. The Sumerians even had a goddess of beer, Ninkasi, celebrated in hymns that double as brewing instructions. Imagine religion and intoxication so intertwined that prayer itself might involve drinking until your head swam. Mainstream fact: cuneiform tablets show beer was not only daily sustenance but also sacred offering. Gods were fed beer, kings poured libations, and citizens joined mass festivals where drinking to excess wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Quirky tidbit: many of these ceremonies featured communal straws, long reeds plunged into giant jars. Whole groups of worshippers leaned in, sipping together, heads knocking as they slurped like children at a milkshake bar. Picture yourself at one of those gatherings, a courtyard full of chanting voices, drums echoing, dancers swirling in skirts of wool. You bend over a jar the size of a barrel, straw in hand, and sip. The beer is sour, pungent, tangy with dates. After several gulps, the sound of the drums seems louder, the dancers' movements sharper, the firelight brighter. Someone beside you giggles uncontrollably, another breaks into spontaneous song. The collective intoxication isn't private, it's a social glue, a dissolving of barriers. But here's the darker twist. Ancient Mesopotamian rulers knew how powerful intoxication could be. A drunken crowd is pliable, suggestible. When everyone's perception blurs, when laughter and swaying take over, the voice of the king or priest cuts through like divine thunder. Drink, they might say, and be united in joy. Drink, and remember your God has blessed you. Who would argue, while sloshed and euphoric, with a leader framed as heaven's mouthpiece? Archaeologists have even found ritual cups inscribed with blessings. May this beer make your heart glad. A kind thought, yes, but also a subtle tool of governance. Happiness as policy. Intoxication as obedience. Now, imagine the other end of the spectrum. Not every drinking ritual was orderly. Some were ecstatic, chaotic, bordering on dangerous. In one Babylonian New Year festival, citizens drank for days, stumbling through streets, singing bawdy songs, sometimes collapsing from exhaustion. For the priests, this chaos wasn't a failure, it was catharsis, a purging of tension that made society easier to control once sobriety returned, and then there's the possibility of stronger brews. While beer was the staple, wine and mead also circulated among elites, often fortified with herbs like mandrake or henbane. These could induce hallucinations, visions, even delirium. Imagine a priest staggering in trance, claiming he sees the god Marduk striding across the night sky. Was it revelation, or just a potent cocktail? Hard to say, the social dimension fascinates. In Mesopotamian taverns, yes, they had them, run mostly by women, people gathered to drink, gossip, and sometimes plot. Court records show taverns as hotbeds of conspiracy and crime, places where lovers schemed and rebels whispered. Intoxication lowered inhibitions, made tongues loose. To rulers, taverns were both vital and dangerous, a space where beer could lubricate loyalty, or treason. Picture a smoky backroom, clay mugs clinking, someone blurting out a dangerous opinion louder than intended. A nervous laugh follows, then another. Soon, half the room is nodding, emboldened by beer's courage. That's how revolutions begin, on barstools as often as battlefields, and yet, at the end of the night, as the crowd stumbles into the lamplit alleys, another truth lingers: intoxication in Mesopotamia wasn't just about escapism. It was about communion, with gods, with neighbors, with rulers, even with enemies. To drink was to enter a shared dream, a fragile alternate world where the rigid hierarchies of empire could soften, if only for a few hazy hours, so, standing there in the courtyard. Read straw between your lips, you realize, Mesopotamian intoxication was never accidental. It was engineered, curated, woven into the very fabric of power. Every gulp was a prayer, a pact, a submission. And yet, hidden within the haze, there was also freedom, laughter unbound, truth spoken, visions glimpsed. The jar was both a leash and a key. Your feet crunch against sand as the Nile Valley fades, and suddenly you're holding a scroll. Not just any scroll, a medical papyrus, the kind physicians carried in leather satchels 3,000 years ago. Its fibers are fragile, its ink a faded brown, but the words still hum with strange prescriptions: honey for wounds, moldy bread for infections, ground herbs for aches, and potions that read suspiciously like recipes for altered states. Mainstream fact: texts like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus are among the oldest medical documents in the world. They list hundreds of treatments, from broken bones to bellyaches. Quirky tidbit: some remedies involve crocodile dung, donkey milk, or fried mouse fat mixed into wine. Now, you might not trust a doctor who tells you to gargle mouse grease, but Egyptians took these concoctions seriously, and here's where the story tilts: many medicines doubled as psychoactive experiences. Mandrake root, for example, appears in prescriptions. It's a powerful plant, hallucinogenic in large doses, sedative in smaller ones. Imagine a patient groaning with toothache, given mandrake wine. Soon, the pain dulls, but so does reality. Colors sharpen, walls ripple, whispers echo louder than they should. Was it a cure, or a chemically induced escape? Historians still argue whether Egyptians deliberately used these plants for visions, or whether altered states were just an accidental side effect. The papyri reveal another pattern: honey appears again and again. Not just for sweetness, but because it fermented easily. Mix it with herbs, let it bubble in clay jars, and you get mead. Some recipes even called for fermented honey with herbs to quiet the spirit. In other words, drink this, you'll feel better. You'll also feel dizzy, silly, maybe even blissfully disconnected. A cure, or a buzz disguised as healing. You roll the papyrus closed and step into an ancient clinic: mud brick walls, jars stacked in niches, patients waiting on reed mats. A healer in a linen kilt measures powders, pours wine, mutters prayers. Someone coughs, another groans, a child squirms. The healer hands out brews, one for fever, one for sorrow, one for torment of the mind. That last one, suspiciously, contains lotus petals. Remember the blue lotus from before? Here it is again, but in the medical setting, not the festival. Drink it, and your chest feels lighter, your anxiety ebbs, your vision sparkles faintly. The healer may insist it's medicine, but part of you suspects he knows it's also. Fun, open debate surfaces here. Did ancient physicians understand active compounds, or were they simply repeating tradition? Some historians claim they knew more than we credit. After all, the moldy bread remedy shows proto-antibiotic awareness. Others say the trippy side effects were unintentional, a happy accident in a messy pharmacology. You, sitting cross-legged in that clinic, aren't sure. All you know is, when the potion hits, you stop worrying about your toothache. You're staring at the ceiling, convinced it's rippling like the Nile, the line between medicine and magic blurred constantly. Papyrus spells often appear alongside prescriptions. For headaches, rub oil infused with herbs onto your temples, while chanting. Come out, demon, leave this head. Practical pharmacology mixed with spiritual exorcism. And if the herbs happen to sedate or intoxicate, so much the better. The cure worked on both the body and the mind, even if the science was sketchy. Imagine another cure. For sleeplessness, a papyrus suggests poppy extract. Yes, opium. Mixed with beer, it made for a potent nightcap. The patient drifts into drowsy bliss, dreams filled with strange symbols. Did the healer intend for his patient to trip into another realm? Maybe not, but he certainly didn't complain when it worked, and in the dusty margin of one papyrus, faint doodles show geometric spirals. Were they idle scribbles by a bored scribe? Or perhaps echoes of someone's vision while testing a particularly strong recipe? As the clinic fades, you're left holding one truth: medicine in ancient Egypt was practical, spiritual, and psychedelic all at once. Every dose was a gamble, between healing and hallucination. You drift deeper into the tomb, torchlight bouncing on painted walls. The silence is thick, the air dry, and the colors still vivid after thousands of years: lapis blues, ochre reds, dazzling golds. Figures float across plaster, gods with animal heads, boats sailing through skies, endless fields of wheat. But the longer you stare, the more it feels strange. Not just art, but something else. Mainstream fact: Egyptian tomb paintings were designed to guide the dead into the afterlife. They showed offerings, rituals, and the landscapes of paradise. Yet, quirky tidbit, some of these murals twist into kaleidoscopic patterns, spirals, overlapping stars, dreamlike sequences that look suspiciously like visions from an altered state of mind. Take the tomb of Nebuchadnezzar. His banquet scene is famous: dancers whirl, women drink from lotus cups, musicians pluck harps. The proportions bend, the eyes are wide, the energy chaotic. Some scholars suggest these paintings aren't just depictions of earthly pleasure, they might be echoes of how feasts felt under the influence. Imagine guests intoxicated on spiced wine and blue lotus, watching musicians blur into streaks of sound, then commissioning painters to capture that dizzy shimmer on plaster. You walk along the wall, torch flickering. One panel shows the sky goddess Nut stretched across the ceiling, stars embedded in her body. Her arms arch downward, her mouth open wide. To modern eyes, it feels almost cosmic psychedelic, like something you'd expect on the cover of a 1970s vinyl. Was this cosmic imagery just symbolic, or did it reflect how ancient Egyptians saw the universe when their senses shifted? Historians still argue whether these visions were deliberate, ritual-induced, or simply artistic convention. A whisper in the dark: what if tombs doubled as trip diaries? Not in the modern sense, of course. No one carved day 3 on Mandrake, saw Osiris glowing, but maybe in their symbolism. Spirals representing altered perception. Floating figures suggesting detachment from the body. Scenes of gods appearing mid-feast, capturing those uncanny hallucinations when drink or smoke twisted reality. Another detail, the colors. Egyptians prized intense pigments, ultramarine from crushed lapis, deep greens from malachite, fiery reds from ochre. Under torchlight, these shades shimmered, glowing almost unnaturally. Now imagine beholding them after sipping a lotus brew. The goddess Hathor seems to pulse. Her cow horns glowing, her eyes meeting yours. Did the walls come alive? Or did altered vision make them breathe? A step further, and you face the weighing of the heart scene, Anubis adjusting the scales, the feather of Ma'at balanced against the soul. To a sober mind, it's morality. To a drugged one, it might be a terrifying hallucination, your chest heavy, your heart beating too loud, the sense of cosmic judgment weighing literally upon you. What better way to prepare for eternity than to live that vision firsthand? Chemically assisted, theories abound. Some Egyptologists insist the hallucinatory interpretation is modern projection. Ancient art was symbolic, not experiential. Others argue the evidence, lotus cups, spiced wines, psychoactive herbs in medical texts, suggests Egyptians knew exactly what they were doing. These weren't accidents. These were visions, recorded in paint, preserved for millennia. You run your hand along cool plaster. The figures are rigid yet alive. A musician tilts her head back, eyes closed, lotus stem in hand. A dancer bends in impossible posture, almost breaking form. The scene feels like a snapshot of ecstasy. Was she high? Was the painter? Or was the whole community in on it, seeing gods more vividly than we can imagine? A final image in the torch's glow, boats sailing across a star-studded sky. Souls drifting into eternity. You can almost hear the water lapping, though the chamber is silent. You blink, and the stars painted above blur, then swirl, then seem to shift position. No wonder the dead carried these visions into the afterlife. They weren't just decoration. They were maps of the mind, trips immortalized in stone. Your torchlight fades, and you find yourself seated not in a tomb but in a palace hall. The floor gleams with polished limestone, incense curls through the air, and servants move like shadows. At the center, upon a gilded chair, sits the pharaoh, radiant, aloof, crowned with gold and lapis. Around him, jars of wine, bowls of lotus petals, dishes of exotic herbs. Here, intoxication is not just a pastime. It is a privilege, carefully rationed, tightly controlled, woven into the machinery of power. Mainstream fact, pharaohs often staged elaborate banquets, where wine flowed freely for the elite. Archaeologists have found jars labeled with vintages, estates, and even years of pressing. An early form of wine classification. Quirky tidbit, some jars bore warnings like very good or extremely strong, as if ancient sommeliers were trying to signal, careful, this one will knock you flat. Imagine the scene, courtiers sip cautiously, knowing too much indulgence risks embarrassment before the divine ruler. Musicians strum lutes, dancers whirl, and the pharaoh raises his own cup, a signal. When he drinks, so do you. When he laughs, so do you. His intoxication sets the rhythm of the entire court, but beyond the feasts lies something subtler. Access to psychoactive plants and brews wasn't democratic. Priests and nobles often monopolized the blue lotus, mandrake, and spiced wines, reserving them for rituals or elite gatherings. The common farmer got his beer ration, the pharaoh got visions of eternity. To drink the sacred mixtures was to claim closeness to the gods. And the pharaoh, believed to be a god himself, drank deepest. Historians still argue whether rulers genuinely sought mystical visions or whether they used intoxication as theater. Was a pharaoh swaying in lotus dream stupor communing with Ra, or simply putting on a dazzling show of divine closeness? Either way, the spectacle worked. A ruler who claimed to see the gods held undeniable authority. There are whispers, too, of more private highs. Some sources hint that pharaohs may have indulged in hashish or opium, imported through trade routes. A strong dose could turn a quiet chamber into a cosmic stage. Imagine Ramses reclining, incense thick, convinced he sees Horus descending in falcon form. To his attendants, this was proof of divine contact. To modern eyes, perhaps it was chemistry at work. Even funerary rituals reflect this control. Specially prepared wines and herbs were placed in royal tombs, ensuring the pharaoh's eternal journey was accompanied by altered states. If ordinary citizens used these substances to ease pain or celebrate festivals, the pharaoh claimed them for immortality. And yet, there's a sly undertone. What happens when the ruler is too drunk? Ancient records hint at embarrassing scenes, kings stumbling, slurring, indulging too freely. One tale describes Akhenaten's court as a swirl of excess, with wine cups overflowing and musicians collapsing from exhaustion. Imagine the whispers among servants, the living God cannot even stand without help. Even divine authority could wobble when intoxication went too far, but for the most part, pharaohs weaponized their highs. Picture a midnight ritual in Karnak's temple. The air thick with incense, priests chanting, the pharaoh sipping a spiced brew. He sways, eyes wide, then declares, "I have seen Ammonius. He blesses my reign." Whether or not he actually saw anything hardly mattered. His people believed, the hierarchy was clear, workers received beer to numb their bodies, nobles tasted wine to sweeten their tongues, priests inhaled incense to cloud their senses. The pharaoh alone claimed the full spectrum, from earthly buzz to cosmic revelation, and you, watching from the edge of the banquet, realize, in Egypt, intoxication wasn't equal. It was power, poured, smoked, and sipped from golden cups. The higher you stood, the stronger your high. The palace walls dissolve, and now you're standing at a bustling dock where the Nile meets the Mediterranean. Ships creak, ropes groan, sailors shout in half a dozen languages. Crates are unloaded, cinnamon from distant Ceylon, incense from Punt, cedar from Lebanon, and tucked discreetly among them, pouches of herbs, powders, and resins that could alter minds as much as they pleased palates. Mainstream fact: ancient Egypt thrived on trade, connecting Africa, the Near East, and the Mediterranean. Goods flowed constantly: gold, grain, papyrus, oils. But with them came new substances, strange plants, and foreign intoxicants. Quirky tidbit: one tomb painting even shows a monkey drinking from a wine jar. Proof that imports weren't just consumed by people but also shared, accidentally or deliberately, with their pets. Step closer to a merchant caravan from Nubia. Among their treasures is cannabis resin, yes, hashish, likely pressed into cakes or rolled into little balls. Egyptians may have burned it as incense or mixed it into wine. Imagine a courtier leaning over a foreign trader's bundle, sniffing cautiously, then smiling slyly. Soon after, he's slipping a few tokens of silver in exchange. The smell drifts into temple rituals, adding a new layer to the haze already swirling there. From Syria and Canaan came mandrake and opium, stronger than the local blue lotus. These roots and resins were packed in jars, wrapped in leaves, smuggled alongside frankincense. At feasts, a guest might suddenly see stars shimmer indoors or hear music that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Was it divine presence, or just imported chemistry? Historians still argue whether such substances were common indulgence or restricted, whispered luxuries for elites. Picture yourself following a caravan inland. Donkeys plod along, loaded with sacks. The desert wind is hot, the merchants weary, but their goods include wild herbs unknown to Egyptians. When brewed, they taste bitter, earthy, but they send the drinker floating. Around the campfire, laughter rises as traders swap stories. Someone hums a tune, another swears he sees a god dancing in the flames. These aren't just exchanges of goods, they're exchanges of altered experiences. Foreign influence reshaped Egyptian intoxication. Wine itself, though adopted early, spread through Levantine trade. New strains arrived, stronger, sweeter, aged in ways Egyptians hadn't tried. Soon nobles weren't satisfied with local brew. They wanted the imported, the exotic, the intoxicants that whispered of lands beyond the desert, and with trade came secrecy. Some substances were celebrated openly, like incense burned for gods. Others were kept quiet, tucked away in jars without labels. Imagine a priest sneaking into a temple storeroom, lifting a stopper, inhaling resinous smoke that wasn't meant for public ritual but for private vision quests. Control shifted with these imports. Pharaohs and priests decided who could taste what, just as they had with native herbs. Ordinary workers might never see mandrake root or Syrian opium in their lifetimes. But elites could sip, smoke, and swallow their way to altered states that peasants could only imagine, and yet, leaks happened. Tavern owners, cunning as ever, sometimes acquired scraps from sailors, half-empty jars of foreign wine, leftover herbs, resin crumbs. They mixed them into drinks and sold them cheap. Picture a smoky tavern near the docks, sailors and locals alike leaning on clay tables, sipping a brew that made the floor tilt just a little more than usual. The Nile, the desert caravans. The sea, they weren't just highways for goods. They were veins pumping new highs into Egyptian culture. Every shipment carried not just wealth but possibility. With each exotic substance, reality itself seemed a little wider, a little stranger. And you realize, intoxication in Egypt wasn't an isolated invention. It was global, cross-pollinated, a shared experiment in bending the mind across empires. The docks and caravans fade, and now you find yourself in a far humbler setting. The palace glitz and temple incense are gone. You're in a mud-brick courtyard, chickens scratching at the dust, children giggling, a clay pot bubbling faintly in the corner. This isn't a festival or a banquet, it's everyday life in an Egyptian household. And even here, intoxication had a quiet role to play. Mainstream fact, most families brewed their own beer at home. It was the daily drink, safer than Nile water, nourishing with grain, and given even to children. Quirky tidbit, this beer was often so thick you could practically chew it, and people sometimes sipped it through straws to avoid floating chaff. Think of it as a smoothie that could get you tipsy if you weren't careful. Picture yourself watching a woman mash emmer wheat, add dates for sweetness, and pour the mash into clay jars. The mixture ferments in the heat, covered with reeds. By evening, it's ready, cloudy, sour, filling. A father gulps it after hauling bricks all day, a grandmother drinks it to ease aches. The kids? They get a watered version, just enough to calm them at bedtime. Everyone, in some way, is on the spectrum of buzz, but households didn't stop at beer. Simple herbal remedies were brewed at home, too. A pinch of poppy for sleeplessness, a bit of blue lotus steeped in warm water for anxiety. Picture a mother coaxing her sick child to sip a bitter drink, whispering prayers as she does. Maybe the child stops coughing, maybe he just stares dreamily at the ceiling, drifting into strange dreams. Either way, the household considered it medicine. Historians still argue whether families fully understood the psychoactive effects or whether they chalked it all up to magic. Was a night of weird dreams just a cure working, or a god's visitation? To them, it didn't matter. Illness lifted, mood softened, life went on. Even household rituals carried intoxication. Before meals, families sometimes burned herbs or incense as offerings to household gods. The smoke curled into the air, and sitting close to the fire, someone might start to feel lightheaded, eyes watering, thoughts drifting. Was it divine presence, or just a smoky high? In a tiny mud brick room, the difference blurred. Imagine a birthday or a small family feast. A goat slaughtered, bread baked, neighbors invited. The beer jars multiply, laughter rises, songs break out. A neighbor strums a lute, children clap along, someone pulls out a jar of stronger wine saved for months. Before long, the courtyard is alive with singing and stumbling, just like the festivals of the temples. but scaled down to a neighborhood level. The highs of Egypt weren't only for pharaohs, they lived in backyards, too. Of course, there were risks. Brew gone wrong could sicken a family. Herbs measured poorly could turn from remedy to poison. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a family might whisper that Uncle so-and-so drank too much of that poppy brew and never woke. Yet these dangers didn't stop the tradition. Brewing, mixing, experimenting, it was part of survival. Of course, there were risks. Brew gone wrong could sicken a family. Herbs measured poorly could turn from remedy to poison. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a family might whisper that Uncle so-and-so drank too much of that poppy brew and never woke. Yet these dangers didn't stop the tradition. Brewing, mixing, experimenting, it was part of survival, and there's one more layer. Everyday intoxicants carried not just physical effects but emotional ones. Imagine a weary father, beer mug in hand, sitting with his sons under the stars. He sips slowly, loosens, finally laughs after a hard week. The buzz connects him to his family, smooths the roughness of labor. Or a grandmother, sipping a lotus tea, humming old songs until her head nods. These small highs stitched the social fabric as much as they soothed the body, so when you glance around the courtyard, chickens roosting, jars bubbling, neighbors leaning on the wall with clay mugs, you realize, intoxication in Egypt wasn't only grand, exotic, or elite. It was homemade, woven into daily life, part medicine, part pleasure, part necessity. The grand banquets might fade in memory, but the bubbling clay pot in a corner never stopped fermenting. The courtyard quiets, and you're pulled toward a smaller, darker room where shelves hold charms, amulets, and tiny jars. Here, the line between substance and symbol blurs even more. Everyday Egyptians didn't just rely on brews and smoke, they believed herbs paired with charms could shield their souls, sharpen their wits, or even bend fate itself. Mainstream fact, amulets were everywhere in Egypt. Scarabs, eyes of Horus, little figures of gods, people wore them, buried them, placed them in doorways. Quirky tidbit, some were soaked in herbal infusions before being worn, as if the magic of the plant and the magic of the charm worked better together. Imagine slipping on a necklace that smells faintly of poppy or lotus. Carrying not just symbolism but a subtle psychoactive trace, picture a priest crafting a protective charm for a nervous villager. He grinds herbs, mixes them into oil, rubs the charm until it glistens, then whispers incantations. The villager ties it around his neck. Maybe the oil scent calms him, maybe the herb in contact with skin tingles slightly. He feels safer, lighter, more confident. Was it divine protection, or a placebo with a chemical kick? Historians still argue whether the ancients knew these effects were pharmacological or whether they considered them purely spiritual. Even funerary amulets carried this fusion. Some were buried with packets of herbs sewn into linen wrappings. Blue lotus petals, cannabis seeds, even resins were tucked close to the heart. The logic? To keep the soul calm and protected on its dangerous journey through the underworld. If the spirit needed courage, perhaps a little plant aid was in order. And consider the eye of Horus, painted on jars of wine or beer. Not only did it symbolize protection, but some jars contained stronger brews. Imagine sipping from a cup with Horus staring back at you, convinced that with each swallow you were not only tipsy but shielded from evil. The charm gave psychological power, the drink gave chemical boldness. Together, they created an almost supernatural confidence. Households used these combinations, too. A mother might give her child a charm soaked in calming herbs to ward off nightmares. A farmer might rub a charm with hashish oil before a long journey, believing it kept bandits away. Did the oil dull his nerves, making him feel braver? Very likely. But to him, it was magic working through matter. The state knew this, too. Priests often sold both charms and substances, binding the two into a single transaction. You weren't just buying protection, you were buying a full-spectrum high of faith, scent, and chemistry. It was commerce, belief, and pharmacy in one, and here's a curious thought. Some scholars suggest amulets acted almost like early drug containers. Tiny hollow scarabs or tubes could store resins or powders, ready to be sniffed, chewed, or sprinkled when needed. Imagine a noble fingering a golden charm during a feast, then discreetly opening it to dab a pinch of resin onto his tongue. A sacred symbol and a party trick. All in one. You glance around the room, shelves stacked with charms glowing faintly in torchlight. Each one hums with dual purpose, protection from the unseen, and perhaps a subtle chemical nudge to make that protection feel real. And you realize, in Egypt, getting high wasn't always about chasing visions. Sometimes it was about safety, luck, and survival. Amulets weren't just jewelry. They were wearable highs, talismans infused with chemistry, belief, and just enough placebo power to shape a person's world. The smell of resin still lingers on your hands as you step out of the amulet chamber. The night air hums with faint drum beats, and you follow the sound toward a vast courtyard lit by firelight. Here, you discover Egypt at its most unrestrained. Its festivals, these weren't quiet temple rituals. They were explosions of energy sanctioned by gods and priests, a chance for ordinary people to drink, dance, and lose themselves completely. At the heart of them was Hathor, goddess of love, music, and intoxication. Her festivals, especially the festival of drunkenness, turned entire cities into carnivals of altered states. Mainstream fact, records describe processions of music, dancing, and ritual drinking in honor of Hathor. Quirky tidbit, some participants were encouraged to drink until they passed out, reenacting the myth where Hathor nearly destroyed humanity until tricked into drinking beer dyed red to look like blood. Passed out festival-goers symbolized salvation, while also experiencing one of history's first state-sponsored blackouts. Picture it, beer flowing from clay jars, blue lotus petals floating in wine, hashish smoke wafting through the crowd. Priests didn't scold, this excess was sacred. To stagger through the streets drunk wasn't shameful, it was divine duty. The act blurred lines between religious ritual and social release. For peasants who lived on hard bread and backbreaking labor, these festivals were a rare taste of freedom, ecstasy, and maybe visions too. Dancers swayed with painted eyes, musicians thumped drums, rattled sistra, and blew flutes until rhythm pulsed like a heartbeat. People collapsed in laughter, or wept, or swayed in trance. Some scholars believe the combination of sound, alcohol, and plants created a kind of group hypnosis. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder in that crowd, the bass of drums rattling your bones, the smoke filling your lungs, your head spinning with drink. You wouldn't just be watching a festival, you'd be inside a living god's presence, and it wasn't only Hathor. Batet, goddess of pleasure and cats, had her own wild festivals. Her city, Bubastis, hosted parties described by Greek visitors as rowdy beyond belief. Wine boats floated up the Nile, music carried from shore to shore, and entire families joined in the revelry. Imagine 100,000 people traveling upriver just to drink, dance, and forget their worries beneath Bastet's watchful eyes. But these weren't just excuses to party. They carried layers of meaning. Drinking to excess was seen as opening the self to divine energy. Losing control meant letting the gods in. Ecstatic dancing mirrored the movements of the divine. Even visions, whether induced by plants, smoke, or sheer sensory overload, were read as messages from higher powers, and festivals gave everyone permission. A strict social hierarchy normally ruled Egypt, but during these nights, slaves, farmers, nobles, even priests stood shoulder to shoulder. The boundaries blurred, if only temporarily, as alcohol and herbs leveled the field. In that sense, intoxication was more than entertainment, it was an equalizer. Still, control lingered. Priests and rulers oversaw the rituals, managing the flow of beer and offerings. The chaos was sanctioned but contained. Too much unregulated ecstasy threatened order, too little robbed the gods of their due. The state had to let the people get high, but only on schedule. Think of it like this: ancient Egypt built sobriety into everyday life, but festivals functioned as a pressure valve. For a few nights a year, the people could release their frustrations, indulge their senses, and surrender to altered states, all framed as worship. And when it ended, life returned to order, fields were tilled, and pyramids were built. The chaos made the discipline bearable. You stand in the firelit courtyard, watching the swirl of dancers, smelling the heady mix of beer, lotus, and resin. A woman presses a cup into your hand, smiling as the drumbeat pounds faster. You realize you're witnessing not just a party, but a culture's way of balancing ecstasy and order. For Egypt, intoxication wasn't rebellion. It was ritualized chaos, sacred, temporary, and absolutely unforgettable. The firelight of the courtyard fades, and you find yourself wandering into the desert night. The drums, the chants, the dizzy swirl of drink and smoke, all of it grows quieter with each step. A faint wind rises, carrying with it the fading scent of resin, lotus, and beer. You realize you're walking into the slow decline of practices that once defined a civilization. As Egypt shifted through dynasties, conquerors, and cultural tides, so too did its relationship with altered states. The new kingdom had embraced festivals of excess, priests experimenting with incense, and households steeping blue lotus in their wine. But with time, especially as foreign powers like the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and finally Romans took control, the rituals of intoxication began to change. Mainstream fact: under Ptolemaic rule, Greek-style symposiums influenced drinking culture, replacing the mass festivals of Hathor with smaller, more elite gatherings. Quirky tidbit: some evidence suggests that imported opium from the eastern Mediterranean entered Egypt during this period, possibly shifting how medicine and ritual substances were used. But scholars still argue whether the Egyptians themselves ever embraced opium widely, or if it remained a luxury item for foreign elites. The old balance between sacred chaos and daily discipline wavered. Festivals of drunkenness continued but lost some of their bite. Priestly control weakened as foreign gods were imported, blending or replacing older deities. Bastet's wild revelries at Bubastis slowly dulled, remembered more in stories than in practice. The intoxicating haze that once bound communities together now flickered like a dying flame. You can almost picture the shift: clay jars replaced by amphorae, hieroglyphs giving way to Greek letters, incense recipes rewritten with foreign herbs. The intoxicating highs of Egypt's golden days gave way to subtler indulgences, refined wines, and imported luxuries. The Nile still carried boats of revelers, but the energy had changed. It was no longer about surrendering to divine ecstasy, but about status, taste, and politics. And then came Christianity. With its stern disapproval of pagan excess, the very festivals that once honored Hathor and Batet were branded immoral. Temples that once filled with incense smoke and ecstatic dancers grew silent, their altars stripped, their gods replaced. By the time Islam arrived centuries later, the old intoxicating rituals had been buried deep under new orders of faith and discipline, but faint echoes lingered. Even today, blue lotus still grows along the Nile, its petals still steeped in tea or alcohol by curious hands. Incense still burns in Egyptian households, connecting the living with the divine. Beer, once rationed to workers hauling stone, remains one of humanity's oldest companions. The culture that once celebrated intoxication as divine chaos may have vanished, but its spirit continues to drift, like faint smoke in the desert wind. You pause, gazing across the sands. In the distance, the great pyramids still stand, silent witnesses to thousands of years of feasts, rituals, and revelries. Their stones may not tell you of lotus or hashish, of drunken nights under Bastet's moon, or of priests coughing through incense clouds. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of laughter, drums, and divine intoxication carried by the Nile breeze. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians really got higher than you'd ever believe or if we're simply projecting our own fascination onto their fragmented records. But you've walked through their fields, their tombs, their temples, and their festivals tonight. You've breathed their smoke, tasted their brews, and swayed with their dancers. Whatever the truth, the possibility is intoxicating in itself. The night grows quieter. The last ember fades. The smoke drifts into nothingness. Egypt's great highs have ended, but their memory lingers, soft and shimmering, like a mirage across the sands. Now, as you settle deeper into the quiet, let the story soften and drift away. The drums are gone, the fires extinguished, and the festivals of Egypt are only a faint dream. The desert cools around you, stars scattered endlessly above, their light steady and unchanging. Breathe slowly. Imagine the sand beneath your feet turning smooth, then soft, until you're floating rather than walking. Every step you've taken tonight, the fields of poppies, the temple incense, the festivals of Batet, has carried you closer to this calm. There's no more movement now, just a gentle stillness. The Egyptians once believed the soul could travel, rising on smoke or drifting with the breeze. Picture yourself rising, too, not in a rush, but slowly, weightlessly. You are carried by air as soft as silk, drifting away from the noise, away from the brightness, into a deeper, quieter place. Your mind may replay faint images, lotus blossoms, painted tombs, a cup of thick beer passed into your hand, but each image fades as easily as it arrives. You don't need to hold on to any of it. The desert takes the memories, and the stars dissolve them into silence. All that remains is a calm, steady breath. In and out. Slow and easy. Like the Nile itself, flowing endlessly, gently, carrying you toward rest. The story is finished. The journey is complete. You've traveled far enough tonight. So let your eyes close, let your body sink, and allow yourself to drift into sleep. Sweet dreams, traveler.